Some storms don't just knock down trees. They knock down everything you thought you knew about your life. 32-year-old Logan Reed had rebuilt himself from nothing after his wife walked out. One cracked nail at a time, one school lunch packed at 6 a.m., one bedtime story read through exhausted eyes. He didn't need saving. He just needed work. But the storm that rolled into Millhaven that October night didn't care what Logan needed. It sent him straight to the iron gates of Ava Sinclair's estate, a woman whose name was on every business magazine cover, whose smile looked perfect in every photo, and whose life behind closed doors was quietly, systematically being destroyed. One night stranded together, one accidental rumor, one hidden enemy watching them both, and a little girl who somehow saw what neither of them could, that the worst thing that ever happened to them might also be the best. If this story already has you, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. The call came in at 4:17 in the afternoon, which was also the exact moment Logan Reed realized he had exactly $11 in his checking account and a field invoice that wasn't getting paid until Friday. He was sitting in the cab of his truck in the parking lot of Millhaven Elementary, engine running for the heat, watching the sky turn the particular shade of yellow-gray that people around here had learned to take seriously. His phone buzzed against the cracked dashboard. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. This Logan Reed, the contractor? The voice on the other end was clipped, female, clearly someone used to getting to the point. That's me. I need emergency storm prep done on a property off Route 9, Sinclair Estate. Can you be here by 5? Logan looked at the sky again. That yellow-gray had deepened. The wind was already picking up enough to rock his truck on its frame. Route 9 was 20 minutes out, maybe 15 if he pushed it, and any contractor worth a damn knew you didn't start exterior work with a storm this close. The sensible answer was no. He thought about the $11. I can be there by 1:45. He was there at 4:52. The gates were already open when he pulled up, which he thought was either good planning or carelessness, and he didn't know enough about Ava Sinclair yet to know which one she was capable of. He'd heard the name, obviously. Everyone in Millhaven had. She'd grown up 3 towns over, left for college at 17, built something called Vertex Systems from a converted garage in her mid-20s, and turned it into a tech company worth somewhere north of $800 million by the time she was 29. The estate she'd bought 2 years ago sat on 11 acres at the edge of town. Old stone walls, mature oaks, a main house that had been built in 1887 and updated just enough to be livable without losing its bones. Logan had driven past it maybe 100 times. He'd never been inside the gates before. The driveway was long and curved, and when the house came into view, he had a moment, just a moment, where he forgot he was supposed to be working. The place was something. 3 stories of dark stone with a wide front porch and tall windows that caught the last of the afternoon light. But it wasn't the architecture that stopped him. It was the figure standing on the porch roof. A woman, dark hair whipping around her face, dressed in what looked like business clothes, blazer, dark trousers, completely wrong for what she was doing, leaning out over the edge of the porch roof, trying to reach a section of loose copper flashing that was already peeling back in the wind and making a sound like something tearing. Logan hit his brakes. He got out of the truck without fully deciding to, cupped his hands around his mouth, and shouted up at her. Hey, what are you doing? She looked down at him. Even from 20 feet below and with the wind doing what it was doing to her hair, there was something composed about her face, like she'd already made peace with the fact that this was a stupid idea and was just committed to seeing it through. The flashing is going to take out the gutter when the storm hits, she said, completely matter of fact. I was trying to secure it. With what? She held up a strip of duct tape. Logan pressed his hand over his face for a second. Ma'am, please come down. I'm almost... You are wearing dress shoes on a wet roof, and there is a Category 2 system 40 miles out. Please, come down. She looked at the duct tape. She looked at the flashing. She looked at Logan. Then she turned around carefully and climbed back through the window she'd come out of, which was, he would later realize, the window to her home office on the 2nd floor. She came around through the front door 2 minutes later, and Logan had his truck backed up to the porch by then and was already unloading. Up close, she was younger looking than he'd expected, and tireder looking than any of her magazine photos suggested. There were shadows under her eyes that concealer hadn't quite reached. She held herself straight, but there was a tension in her shoulders that had clearly been living there for a while. You're the contractor, she said. Logan Reed. He stuck out his hand and she shook it briefly, her grip firm and businesslike. Ava Sinclair. I have a list. She did have a list. Printed out, 2 pages, organized by location and priority level. Logan looked it over while the wind pushed at his back, and he had to admit, the list was thorough. Whoever had compiled it understood the property's vulnerabilities in a storm better than most homeowners did. Generator hookup, secondary drainage check on the east side, board up priority for the older windows in the north wing, loose fencing along the back property line. You put this together yourself? He asked. I put everything together myself. She said it without arrogance, just fact. They worked. Logan had brought 2 guys with him, Marcus, who'd been on his crew for 3 years, and a younger kid named Dex, who was still learning but had the good sense to work fast and ask questions later. The 3 of them moved through the list while Ava tracked their progress from various points around the property, occasionally offering information about where things were or noting something they'd missed. She wasn't hovering. She wasn't the kind of woman who hovered. She was checking. There was a difference. By 6:30, the sky had gone fully dark and the rain had started. Not the warning sprinkle, but the real thing, sudden and sideways, driven by wind gusts that hit 40 miles an hour on Logan's weather app. Marcus and Dex made it to their cars. Logan was wrapping up the last of the North Wing boarding when the radio crackled with news that Route 9, the only road back into town from this direction, had flooding at the creek crossing. He stood in the doorway of the equipment shed and stared at his phone, watching the road closure notification spread across his screen. Then another one. Then the county-wide alert for the next 6 hours. He was stuck. He knocked on the front door and Ava answered it herself, which surprised him. He'd assumed there was staff somewhere. Route 9's closed, he said. Both alternate routes are flagged too. I think I'm going to be here for a while. She looked at him for a moment, then she stepped back from the door. Come in. The inside of the house was not what Logan had expected. He'd expected something staged, the kind of place where everything is placed for effect and nothing is actually lived in. What he found instead was a house that was clearly occupied by someone who worked too much and slept too little. There were stacks of documents on the dining room table, a laptop open in the study with 4 browser windows visible, coffee mugs in various states of completion on every flat surface, and a large corkboard in the hallway covered in sticky notes and printed charts that he very carefully did not look at too closely because it wasn't his business. There's a guest room on the 2nd floor, Ava said. 3rd door on the left. I'll get you towels. I can just wait it out in the truck. It's 38 degrees and the heat in your truck is running off fumes. Don't be stubborn. She was already heading toward the linen closet. Logan stood in the entrance hall, dripping on her hardwood floor, and thought that was probably the most direct hospitality he'd ever been offered. He showered, changed into the dry clothes he always kept in a bag in his truck for exactly this kind of situation, and came back downstairs to find Ava in the kitchen. She was making something that turned out to be pasta. Not elaborate, just pasta with jarred sauce and a handful of vegetables she'd added from the fridge, the kind of meal someone made when they were cooking out of obligation rather than interest. You don't have to feed me, he said from the doorway. I was already making it. She glanced over her shoulder. Do you eat pasta? I eat anything. Good. They sat across from each other at the kitchen island, which felt strange and also, after a few minutes, not strange at all. Logan noticed she ate quickly and distracted, one eye on her phone, reading something. He noticed she'd changed clothes too. Still put together, dark jeans and a simple sweater, but less armored than she'd been outside. Her hair was down now, and wet at the ends from having washed the rain out of it. Big storm for October, he said, mostly just to have something going. She was reading. You usually ride these out alone here? She looked up at that. Something shifted in her expression. Not offense exactly. More like she was recalibrating how much she wanted to answer. Usually, yes. No family nearby? My parents are in Phoenix. My brother's in London. She said it like she was reciting facts from a file. Friends? She set her phone down and looked at him directly. Mr. Reed. Logan, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate that you're trying to make conversation, but I'm in the middle of something fairly complicated at work, and I'm not great company right now, so please don't take it personally if I'm not chatty. He nodded. Fair enough. She picked her phone back up. He ate his pasta. The storm hammered at the windows. He thought about Nora. Nora was 7 years old and was spending the storm at his sister Karen's house 3 miles into town, which was solid ground and well above the flood zone, which Logan knew because he'd confirmed it twice before coming out here. Nora was fine. Nora was probably watching movies and eating popcorn and having a better evening than he was. But knowing that didn't stop the low-grade background hum of worry that had been running in him since the day his ex-wife, Claire, had sat across from him at their kitchen table 4 years ago and explained very calmly that she didn't want to be a mother anymore and she was leaving. Not just leaving Logan, leaving Nora. Logan had sat with that for a long time before he understood that the woman he'd married was a stranger to him, and that the only person in that house he actually knew anymore was the 3-year-old upstairs who'd been sleeping through the whole thing. He was not particularly bitter about Claire. He'd moved past bitter somewhere around the 18-month mark. What he had instead was a vigilance that never fully turned off. This constant awareness of where Nora was and what she needed and whether he was doing it right. "You look like someone's running calculations in your head," Ava said. He looked up. She was watching him over the rim of her mug. She'd switched to tea somewhere in the last few minutes. "Sorry," he said. "Daughter. She's at my sister's place for the night. She's fine. How old?" 7. Something crossed Ava's face. Quick, like a light turning on and off in a room you almost didn't notice. "What's her name?" "Nora." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "That's a good name." She picked it elf, basically. She went through this phase at 4 where she made us call her Nora instead of Emily, which is her actual name. It stuck. Ava smiled at that. A real one, small and unpracticed looking, the kind you get from someone who doesn't smile on command. "Smart kid." "Too smart." He finished his pasta. "She told me last week that my truck has personality issues. She's 7. That earned a laugh. Brief, surprised, like it had escaped before she could catch it. She shook her head and looked back at her mug, but the set of her shoulders had changed. Something had loosened. They ended up talking for another hour without either of them quite deciding to. Not about anything heavy. About the town, mostly. Logan had grown up here, knew its history the way only people who'd stayed did, and Ava had opinions about the place that were sharper and more specific than he'd expected from someone who'd chosen it as a semi-retreat. She asked good questions. She listened when he answered, which was rarer than people thought. Around 9 she said she needed to work, and she was sorry for the company. "Don't apologize," Logan said. "You fed me." She walked him to the guest room and stopped at the door. In the hallway light she looked, not soft exactly, but less constructed than she'd been outside. There were stress lines at the corners of her eyes and a slight tension in her jaw that hadn't released all evening, even in the easier moments. Whatever was happening in her professional life was living in her body. "Thank you for the work today," she said. "Your crew did good. That's what you're paying for." She nodded once, brisk, back to business. "The invoice can go to the company email. I'll make sure it's processed by the end of the week." "Appreciated." He hesitated. "Hey, whatever's complicated, at work, I hope it gets less complicated." She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't quite read. Not warmth, not coldness. Something in between that might have been the beginning of trust, or just exhaustion. "It will," she said, "one way or another." I was up at 6 when the storm had moved through, leaving behind that particular clean wreckage that October nor'easters deposited. Branches down, lawn furniture relocated, a section of the back fence completely flattened. He'd already assessed the damage and was making notes on his phone when Ava appeared on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee. She handed him one without ceremony. "Fence section on the west side," he said, accepting it. "I saw." "Some tile damage on the east wing roof. Nothing structural, but it needs to be addressed before the next rain." "Can your crew do it?" "Yeah, we can come back Wednesday." She nodded, looking out at the yard. In the early morning light, with her hair not quite brushed yet and a mug in both hands, she looked like a different person than the one from last night. Less guarded, or maybe just less awake. There was something real about it. Then her phone went off. She looked at the screen and her face did something complicated. She stepped back from the porch railing, her posture going from open to closed in about 2 seconds. "I have to take this," she said. "I'll get out of your way." She was already walking back inside, phone at her ear, saying, "Tell me exactly what the filing said," in a voice that had gone sharp and flat at the same time. Logan stood on the porch with his coffee and looked at the storm damage and made his list, and tried not to notice the way her voice through the window had the particular tight quality of someone trying very hard not to sound scared. He came back Wednesday with Marcus and Dex. They worked through the repair list: roof tiles, fence section, some drainage clearing on the east side that they'd identified after the storm. Ava was home, but largely invisible, working from her study. She came out twice, once to bring them water and ask about the timeline, once to look at something Logan had flagged on the north side drainage that he wanted to show her in person. "This whole section is channeling wrong," he told her, standing in the overgrown strip between the house and the stone boundary wall. "When water comes heavy, like it did Sunday, it backs up against the foundation. It's not a crisis yet, but it will be." She crouched down and looked at where he was pointing. She had on more practical clothes today: dark jeans, flat boots, a heavy flannel that looked like it might have been bought specifically for the property. "What's the fix?" "Regrading this section, installing a French drain. Maybe 2 days' work." She thought about it. "Add it to the scope." "You sure? It's not cheap." She stood up. "Cheap fixes are how you end up with expensive problems." She looked at the foundation line, something calculating in her expression. "I'll need a quote in writing. I'll have it to you by end of day." She was already moving back toward the house. Then she stopped and turned part way, not quite facing him. "There's a deli tray in the kitchen. I over-ordered for a meeting that got canceled. If your guys want to eat, help yourselves." She went back inside. Dex, who was 18 and never missed anything involving food, materialized at Logan's elbow approximately 3 seconds later. "Did the boss lady just invite us to eat her lunch meeting food?" "Don't make it weird," Logan said. "Go tell Marcus." The second week brought a job that was supposed to be 2 days and turned into 4 when they opened up the North Wing drainage project and found something unexpected: a section of the foundation that had been patched before, badly, with the kind of quick-fix concrete work that a previous owner had clearly hoped would just quietly hold until it became someone else's problem. Logan knocked on the study door with photographs. Ava looked at them for a long time without speaking. He'd worked for enough clients to know the different kinds of silence: the kind that was processing, the kind that was calculating cost, and the kind that was controlled panic wearing a processing expression. This was the third kind. "Best case and worst case," she said. He told her. She set the photographs down on her desk. Behind her, through the study window, Logan could see the corkboard he'd been careful not to look at. And now, in the daylight, he couldn't help catching some of it: sticky notes, printouts, what looked like a timeline with red and black markers. A photograph of 2 men in suits in what looked like a conference room, one of them circled. Ava saw him looking. She stepped slightly sideways, blocking his line of sight to the board. "I'll approve the additional scope," she said. "I want it done right." "Understood." He was at the door when she said, "Logan." He turned. She looked like she was weighing something. "Does your crew do background checks before you hire?" He frowned. "Standard stuff, yeah, criminal record, reference checks. Why?" "I've been having some contractor work done on the property before you. Different company. I'm no longer using them." She paused. "There were some items that went missing from the house. Smaller things. I wasn't sure if I'd just misplaced them." "You report it?" "No." She said it like the answer was obvious. "I have no proof, and I'm in a position right now where involving local authorities in anything connected to this property would create complications I don't need." Logan stood in the doorway, trying to read the shape of what she was telling him. "What kind of complications?" She looked at him steadily. "The complicated kind." He thought about the corkboard, the timeline, the circled photograph, the phone call after the storm. "Tell me exactly what the filing said." He thought about the way she lived in this house, alone, working constantly, no social buffer, eyes that caught everything. "Okay," he said. "My guys are clean, and we don't take things that don't belong to us." "I know," she said. "That's why I kept calling you back." It was Nora who changed things. Karen had an appointment on a Thursday morning, the kind of routine thing that didn't need explanation, and Logan's usual backup for school pickup fell through at the last minute. He called Ava's number with honest embarrassment and asked if it was a problem to have his daughter on site that afternoon while he finished up the drainage work. "She'll stay out of the way," he said. "She's good at that." Ava's pause was exactly one beat too long to be casual. It's fine, she said. Nora was not, by any reasonable definition, good at staying out of the way. She was a 7-year-old with an opinion about everything and an attention span that ran entirely on interest. She arrived in her school clothes, backpack on, and surveyed the estate with the expression of someone conducting a property inspection of her own. It's very big, she told her father seriously. It is. Does one person live here? Yes. Nora considered that. That seems lonely. It's not our business. I'm just saying. Logan set her up with her iPad on the back porch and explained that she was to stay there unless she needed the bathroom, in which case she was to come find him, not go wandering around someone else's house. Nora agreed with the solemn nod of someone who had every intention of ignoring these instructions at the first available opportunity. He was back at the drainage trench approximately 20 minutes when he heard voices. He came around the corner of the house and found Ava sitting on the back porch steps. Not standing, not coming out to check on the work. Sitting on the steps. Nora was beside her, iPad forgotten in her lap, talking with her hands the way she did when she was really engaged. And the thing is, the math part is fine, but Mrs. Horvath doesn't explain the story problem part right, and I already knew the answer before she— Second grade story problems, Ava said. What are they covering? Fractions, but easy ones. Nora's tone carried the weight of someone deeply underestimated. Like 1/2 and 1/4. I already know those. What about mixed fractions? Nora squinted at her. What are those? Like 2.5 or 3 3/4. We haven't done those yet. Want me to show you? Logan stopped at the corner of the house and watched. He wasn't sure why he didn't move. Something about the scene had a quality that made interrupting it feel wrong, like walking into a room during a song. Ava had pulled out her own phone and was showing Nora something on the screen. Nora was leaning in, fully locked in, one hand braced on Ava's knee for balance. She didn't do that with everyone. That easy physical comfort, the casual lean. She did it with Karen, with Logan's mother, with a handful of teachers she'd decided were safe. Nora had good instincts about people. Logan had learned to trust that. So you just put them together, Nora said, pointing at the screen. Exactly. The whole number and the fraction side by side. That's so obvious, Nora said, with feeling. Why didn't Mrs. Horvath just say that? Ava looked up from the phone and caught Logan's eyes over Nora's head. Something moved across her face. Startled, maybe, like she'd forgotten she wasn't alone, and then something quieter and harder to name. She straightened up slightly, reassembled herself. Your dad's watching, she told Nora. Nora turned around, entirely unbothered. She taught me mixed fractions, she announced. I see that, Logan said. She's really smart. I know. Ava stood, brushing porch dust off the back of her jeans. The professional composure was back in place, but it sat differently now, like a coat put on in a hurry. She asked for a snack, she said to Logan. I gave her apple slices. Hope that's fine. That's fine. She's not— Ava stopped, started again. She's very easy to talk to. People say that about her a lot. There was a pause between them that had some texture to it. Nora, oblivious to adult dynamics as only children can be, had already gone back to her iPad, the mixed fractions apparently filed and internalized for future use. I should get back, Ava said. Yeah. She went back inside. Logan stood on the porch and looked at his daughter and didn't say anything for a minute. Dad? Yeah. She was sitting outside by herself when I came to ask you something and you weren't there yet. She looked sad. Nora said it with the matter-of-fact directness of someone for whom human sadness was simply a condition to be noted and, where possible, addressed. So I just stayed. Logan looked at the back door, already closed. Okay, Bug. She's not sad like crying sad, Nora clarified. She's sad like when you can't find something you put down somewhere and you don't even remember what it was. Logan had no immediate answer to that. That's a pretty good way to put it, he said. The fourth week, Logan found the device. He'd been working on a section of the garage-adjacent utility corridor. Routine work, checking insulation, not exciting. When he noticed something that didn't fit. A small black box, maybe the size of a pack of cards, attached to the back of an electrical panel cover with what looked like a combination of industrial adhesive and a zip tie. Clean work. Deliberate work. Someone who knew what they were doing. Logan stood very still for a moment. He'd done enough work on residential and commercial properties to know what he was looking at. He'd seen one once before, on a job site where a client had suspected a business partner of surveillance. This was a wireless transmitter, small, designed to be hidden, capable of picking up sound in a close radius. He did not touch it. He thought about Ava's quiet comment about the previous contractor, about the items that went missing, about the corkboard with its red markers and circled photographs, about the phone call the morning after the storm. Tell me exactly what the filing said. He pulled out his phone and took several photographs from different angles. Then he covered the device with a loose piece of insulation that was already sitting nearby, put it back roughly how he'd found it, and walked up to the main house. He knocked on the study door. "Come in." He walked in and closed the door behind him. Ava looked up from her desk and read something in his face, because she put her pen down immediately. "What happened?" He showed her the photographs. She looked at them for a long time. Her expression was completely controlled, but her jaw had gone tight in a way he recognized from the morning after the storm, from the deli tray afternoon, from every moment when the things she was holding together got heavier. "Where?" she said. "Utility corridor, east side of the garage." "Show me exactly." He showed her. She stood in the corridor for a long minute, looking at the device without touching it. Logan watched her process it, the quick, contained calculation he'd started to recognize as her baseline state, the thing that happened behind her eyes when something required response. "There's more," she said. Not a question. "Probably." She turned and looked at him directly. "I need to sweep the rest of the building." "I can help with that. I know what I'm looking for now." She was quiet for a moment, and he could feel her making a decision. The decision about whether he was someone she could let see more of what was happening, whether the cost of that was worth it. "Okay," she said, "let's start in the study." They found two more, one behind a bookshelf in the study, positioned to capture anything spoken at her desk, one in the kitchen, tucked inside the housing of the range hood. Ava stood in the kitchen looking at the range hood for a long time. "Someone was in this house," she said. Her voice was level, almost eerily level. "The previous contractor," Logan said, "or someone they were working with." She nodded slowly. She looked at the photographs on his phone, scrolled through them once, then handed it back. "Don't remove them," she said. "I need to think about how to handle this." "Ava," he said her name carefully, first time he'd used it to her face. "Whatever this is, you shouldn't be dealing with it alone." She looked at him, that complicated expression again, the one between trust and caution, the one she wore when she was deciding how much of a door to open. "I know," she said quietly. "I'm starting to understand that." Outside, the October sky had gone the color of iron, the kind of color that meant more weather coming, more wind, more disruption. Logan stood in Ava Sinclair's kitchen and felt the shape of something shifting, not between the two of them, not yet, not like that, but around them both. Some larger machinery that had been running in secret was starting to make itself known. He didn't know yet what it was, but he knew, with the certainty of someone who'd spent his life reading structures for hidden damage, that whatever was underneath was more serious than what showed on the surface. And he knew, whether he'd been hired for it or not, that he wasn't going anywhere. The devices stayed where they were. That was the part that bothered Logan most. Not finding them, but leaving them. He understood the logic. Ava had explained it that evening in the kitchen, her voice low and measured, walking through it the same way she probably walked through a board presentation, calm on the outside, everything underneath moving fast. "If whoever planted them knows we found them, they change tactics," she said. "Right now they think they're still listening. That gives us time to figure out who and how." "And what they've already heard." She'd looked at him steadily. "Yes, that too." So the transmitter behind the bookshelf kept sitting there, and the one in the range hood kept sitting there, and Logan kept coming to work every day, knowing the walls were listening to everything and trying not to think too hard about what had already been transmitted to whoever was on the other end. It put a particular kind of quiet into the workdays. His guys noticed something was different. Marcus, especially, who'd been working with Logan long enough to read his mood from 20 feet. But Logan hadn't said anything specific, just told them to do good work and mind their own business, which was more or less the standing job description anyway. The anonymous messages started the second week of November. Ava showed him the first one on a Monday morning, standing in the kitchen doorway while he was going over the week's schedule. She just held out her phone, screen facing him. The message had come through her personal email, not the company address, her personal one. And whoever had sent it had used a routing service that stripped the origin point clean. Step back from the vote. Walk away from Vertex. You won't like what happens if you don't. It read like something a person wrote when they wanted to sound threatening without committing to specifics. Logan handed the phone back. When did this come in? 3 in the morning. How many so far? That's the second. She put her phone in her pocket. First one came 10 days ago. I didn't tell you about it then. Why not? She gave him a look that was almost impatient. Because you're my contractor, Logan. You were hired to fix my foundation and my drainage system, not to... She stopped. Not to what? She turned and looked out the kitchen window at the yard. The November light was thin and gray, the kind that made everything look slightly past its prime. I'm not used to telling people things, she said. I'm aware that's a problem. I'm working on it. It wasn't an apology exactly, but it had the weight of one. Logan sat down at the kitchen island, uninvited, and she didn't say anything about it. Tell me about the vote, he said. So she did. It came out in pieces over the next hour, and Logan understood that he was probably the first person outside her attorney and maybe one trusted board member who was getting the full version. Vertex Systems had been co-founded by Ava and a man named Derek Holt 12 years ago. 2 kids with a shared office and a product idea that nobody thought would scale. Derek had been her business partner, her sounding board, the person she'd called when the company's servers crashed at 3 in the morning during their first major product launch. She'd trusted him the way you trust someone who has stood in the same fire with you. The trouble had started 18 months ago, quietly enough that Ava had initially dismissed it as normal friction. Derek had begun pushing for a majority ownership restructure, framing it as a simplification of their operating agreement, something that would make future investment rounds smoother. The lawyers had flagged language in the proposed restructure that would, in practice, give Derek operational override power if Ava was ever absent or incapacitated. She'd killed that version. He'd come back with a revised one. She'd killed that version too. Then came the shareholder maneuvering. 3 of their largest investors, people who'd been in the company since the early days, had, over the past 6 months, quietly shifted their voting proxies toward Derek. Not enough to change anything on its own, but enough to narrow Ava's controlling margin to something uncomfortable, something that only needed one more push to tip. The vote she was preparing for was a board decision on whether to pursue a specific acquisition, a smaller analytics company that Ava believed in and Derek claimed was overvalued. On the surface, it was an ordinary business disagreement. Underneath it, the way Ava explained it with her hands moving over the kitchen island drawing invisible diagrams, it was a mechanism. A loss on this vote, in the current climate, with the proxy situation the way it was, would be the first in a sequence that Derek could use to argue she'd lost the confidence of the board. After that, the next steps were things Logan didn't know the technical language for, but he understood the shape. You remove someone from the thing they built by making it look like the thing itself is rejecting them. He's been planning this for a long time, Logan said. At least 18 months, probably longer. She said it without bitterness, which was somehow worse than bitterness. It was the voice of someone who had finished being surprised and moved on to dealing with it. And the threats? You think that's Derek too? I think the threats are from someone Derek hired. It's not his style. She paused. Derek is very careful about not leaving fingerprints on anything he does. Logan thought about the device behind the bookshelf. Careful people still make mistakes. She looked at him. I know. That's what I'm waiting for. Outside, Marcus was starting up the concrete saw to cut a new section of drainage channel. The sound tore through the morning and then steadied into its working rhythm. Logan sat at the kitchen island of Ava Sinclair's house and thought about all the ways a person could have their life dismantled by someone they trusted, and how quietly it could happen, and how you could stand in the middle of it and still look completely fine to everyone who didn't know where to look. What do you need? He asked. She blinked, like the question was in a language she needed a second to translate. To fight this, he said. What do you actually need? She was quiet for a moment. Evidence that Derek orchestrated the surveillance. If I can prove he had someone in this house, accessing my private communications, I can take it to the board before the vote. It changes the entire picture. Then let's get it. He stood up. I know cameras, I know property layouts, and I know what a job done with inside information looks like. Walk me through every piece of work the previous contractor did. She looked at him for a long moment. You don't have to do this, she said. I know, he said. Show me the work orders. The work orders told a story once you knew what you were looking at. The previous contractor, a company called Fortis Property Services, which Logan had done a quick search on and found had been incorporated just 14 months ago. Minimal online presence, no real review history, had billed for 9 separate jobs at the estate over the previous year. Routine stuff on the surface, gutter work, interior painting, a boiler inspection, some landscaping. But the locations of each job, mapped against where Logan had found the surveillance devices and the places he'd have chosen to place them for maximum coverage, lined up with a precision that went well past coincidence. The boiler inspection had taken a man into the utility corridor. The interior painting crew had worked in the study. The kitchen work, a minor repair to a cabinet hinge, 1-hour build, had put someone at exactly the height of the range hood. Logan spread the work orders across the kitchen island, which had become their unofficial operations center, and walked Ava through it. She stood beside him and looked at the pattern emerging across the papers, and her expression didn't change much, but her breathing changed, just slightly, in a way that told him this was the piece she'd been missing. The proof of access. The timeline that put specific people in specific rooms. This is enough to start with, she said. I need to get this to my attorney. Secure line, Logan said, not from inside the house. She looked at him. They've been in here for a year, he said. You don't know what else they put in, or where. She closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. Then she opened them. My car. I'll call from my car. Good. She gathered the work orders and her phone and her keys, and then stopped at the kitchen doorway and looked back at him. There was something in her face that wasn't quite gratitude and wasn't quite relief. It was more like the specific expression of someone who has been carrying something alone for a very long time and has just, reluctantly, let someone else put a hand on it. Logan, she said. Yeah. Thank you. She said it like she didn't say it often enough to have the shape of it quite right, like it was a word she'd been practicing. He nodded. She went out to her car. He went back to work. The third threat came 4 days later. This one was different from the others. Not an email, but a physical note, left on the windshield of Ava's car in the locked garage, which meant whoever left it had either a remote opener or a key. Logan photographed it before Ava touched it, bagged it in a gallon Ziploc from the kitchen, and put it in the lockbox in his truck, alongside his copies of the work orders and the surveillance device photographs. The note said, Last warning, the vote is in 3 weeks. Use them wisely. Ava read it through the plastic bag and didn't say anything for a moment. They were standing in the garage, cold air coming through the cracked door. Her car sat in the middle of the space, looking ordinary and violated at the same time. He's getting nervous, Logan said. He should be. Her voice was steady. My attorney is already working on the work order documentation. She's found the connection between Fortis Property Services and a holding company that traces back to a consulting firm Derek has used before. It's not a clean line yet, but it's close. How close is close? Enough that my attorney is flying in from New York on Friday. Logan looked at the bagged note. Good. And this goes to her directly. Yes. Ava took the bag from him carefully. She was holding it with 2 fingers at the corner, away from her body, like it was something she didn't want touching her more than necessary. Then she said, without looking at him, He was at my wedding. Logan didn't say anything. Derek. He was my best man's +1. That's how we met. At my wedding, 12 years ago. I was 22. She said it with a kind of flat disbelief, the particular bewilderment of looking back at the beginning of something and not being able to find the moment it went wrong. I thought I was a good judge of character. You probably were, Logan said. At 22, he changed. Or I never actually saw him clearly. Maybe both. She looked at him then. You're very honest for someone I'm paying. You stopped being just a client about 2 weeks ago, he said. We both know that. A short pause. Something shifted in the air between them. Not romantic exactly. Not yet. But something with the potential to become something. He felt it, and he was pretty sure she did too, and neither of them moved toward it or away from it, just let it sit there like a thing that was still deciding what it was. I know, she said finally, and then, I'm not good at this. Whatever this is. Neither am I, he said. So we're even. She almost smiled. Almost. It was late afternoon when his phone buzzed with a call from Karen. He stepped outside the garage to take it, and Karen's voice came through tight and careful, the way she sounded when she was trying not to alarm him. Logan, Nora's fine, she's right here, but she had a fall at recess today. Mrs. Horvath called me because she couldn't reach you. How bad? It's not bad. She scraped her hands pretty good, and she's got a bruise on her knee that looks worse than it is. She doesn't need stitches. I already took her to the urgent care to make sure. He was already moving toward his truck. I'm coming. You don't have to come right now. She's watching TV and eating goldfish crackers, and she's fine. I'm coming. He found Ava at the side door of the house, watching him. He gave her the short version, and she nodded immediately. Go. Don't even ask. I'll be back tomorrow. I know. She hesitated. Tell her I hope her knee feels better. He drove the 15 minutes to Karen's house with his hands tight on the wheel and that familiar engine running in his chest, the one that had never fully stopped since the day he'd become the only parent in the equation, the one that said you missed a call, you weren't reachable. What if it had been worse? It was an irrational engine, mostly. Nora was fine. Karen had handled it. Everything was okay. He knew all that. The engine ran anyway. Nora was on Karen's couch in her socks, bandaged hands curled around a plastic bowl of goldfish crackers, watching something animated and looking very specifically like a kid who had discovered that minor injuries came with social currency. She looked up when Logan came in the door and gave him the version of the face she made when she was trying to assess how much trouble she was in. I didn't do it on purpose, she said. I know. He sat on the edge of the couch and looked at her hands. Clean bandages, good job. He looked at her knee. Large bruise, already going purple, but the urgent care sticker on her pant leg meant it had been cleared. Does it hurt? A little, she considered. Mostly the hands. Does it hurt enough to get out of helping set the table tomorrow night? She thought about this very seriously. Maybe? Nice try. She leaned against his side, which she did sometimes when she was tired or had been scared earlier, even if she wasn't scared now. He put his arm around her and looked at the TV. Dad? Yeah. Is Ava okay? He looked down at her. Why do you ask? Nora shrugged against him, the small shoulder shrug she did when she was thinking about something but wasn't sure how to put it yet. She always looks like she's waiting for something bad to happen. Logan was quiet for a second. She's got some stuff going on at work. Like hard stuff? Yeah. Nora thought about this. You should help her. I'm trying to. Good. She settled more firmly against his side, apparently satisfied with this answer. On the TV, an animated something chased an animated something else around a brightly colored landscape. Karen appeared from the kitchen doorway with 2 mugs of coffee, gave Logan a look over the top of Nora's head. The look that said, we'll talk more later, she's really okay, don't spiral. And he gave her a small nod back. He stayed for dinner. He helped Nora wash her hands carefully around the bandages. He read her 2 chapters of the book they were halfway through, put her to bed in Karen's guest room, and drove back to his apartment. Sat on his couch in the quiet and thought about the surveillance devices, the work orders, the note in the gallon bag, the photograph of 2 men in suits with one face circled. He thought about Ava standing in the garage holding a threat note by 2 fingers and talking about a wedding from 12 years ago in that quiet, flattened voice. I thought about what Nora had said. She always looks like she's waiting for something bad to happen. 7 years old. Nailed it. The attorney arrived on Friday. Her name was Patricia Weil, and she was somewhere in her mid-50s, compact and precise, with a leather bag that Logan suspected contained enough legal firepower to make a serious problem for Derek Holt's careful lack of fingerprints. She and Ava spent 4 hours in the study with the door closed while Logan worked outside, and he made sure his crew took their lunch break away from that side of the house. When Patricia came out at the end of the afternoon, she stopped to speak to Logan directly on the front steps. Ava had apparently briefed her. She asked him specific questions about the discovery of the devices, the work orders, what he'd photographed and when. He answered everything straight, no embellishment, and she wrote notes without looking at her pad. The Fortis connection is stronger than I expected, she told him. The holding company traces through 2 shell entities, but the final beneficiary is a name I recognize from Derek Holt's financial disclosures. She paused. This is going to be enough. Maybe not for a criminal case immediately, but enough for the board. How much time do we have? 18 days to the vote. She looked at him with the particular evaluating look of someone who'd spent decades reading people across tables. Ms. Sinclair says you found the first device. Yes. And that you've been helping her document everything. Yes. Why? She asked it without judgment, just assessment. Logan thought about how to answer that. He thought about Nora's bandaged hands, and Ava standing alone in a garage holding a threat, and the corkboard with its red markers, and the real smile that escaped in the kitchen the night they talked about his daughter calling her own name after herself. Because she needed someone in her corner, he said, and I was already there. Patricia looked at him for a moment longer. Then she put her notepad in her leather bag and snapped it closed. Good answer, she said. She went back inside. Logan stood on the front steps of the estate and looked out at the property. The repaired fence line, the corrected drainage channel, the roof where he'd pulled off the copper flashing that Ava had been trying to secure with duct tape on the worst afternoon of the year. The estate looked the same as it always had from the outside. Stone and oak and the long driveway curving back toward the iron gates. But underneath the surface, the rot they'd found in the foundation was still there, not in the stone and concrete, but in the 18 months of careful sabotage, the planted devices, the manufactured crisis. And somewhere outside those iron gates, a man who had stood at a wedding 12 years ago was watching the clock on 18 days and deciding his next move. Logan went back to work. He didn't know what was coming next, but he knew the structure of what he was standing in, and he knew that things that looked solid from the outside could be close to collapse at the foundation. He'd seen it enough times to know the signs. He just needed to make sure, when it came down, he was standing in the right place. 18 days was not a lot of time. Patricia Weil worked from a hotel in town, which was either professional distance or the precaution of someone who didn't want her presence at the estate to become visible to anyone watching. Logan suspected both. She and Ava communicated through a secure messaging app that Patricia had installed on Ava's phone during the Friday visit, and the old personal email, the one that had received the anonymous threats, stayed open and active so whoever was on the other end would see no change in pattern. Logan had started thinking about the estate the way he thought about a job site with a structural problem. Find where the load is, trace where the stress is traveling, figure out what fails first if nothing changes. The surveillance devices were the most obvious vulnerability. But there was another one he'd been circling for days without quite naming it. Ava was alone in this house every night. He didn't say that out loud. I wasn't sure how she'd receive it, and he understood that suggesting a woman who ran a billion-dollar company might need someone to check on her safety was the kind of thing that could land wrong depending on how it was framed. But the reality was that whoever had planted those devices had already demonstrated they could access the property, access the garage, access the interior of the house. They'd done it multiple times, carefully, over the course of a year. The threats were escalating, and every night when Logan drove back to his apartment in town, Ava Sinclair stayed at that estate with 11 acres around her and iron gates that had already proven not to be enough. He raised it on a Tuesday, 10 days before the vote, sitting in his truck in the estate driveway after the crew had left. Ava had come out to ask him something about the drainage documentation they were compiling for Patricia. They'd found that several of the Fortis work orders listed drainage repairs that had never actually been performed, which was the kind of billing fraud that supported the argument that Fortis was never really there to do property work at all. I want to talk about your nights here, he said. She leaned against the passenger door of his truck, arms crossed in the particular way she held herself when she was preparing to push back on something. I'm fine. I didn't say you weren't. You were about to. I was going to say that fine isn't the same as safe, and that whoever is running this operation has already been in your house at least 3 times that we know of. He kept his voice level. Patricia is in town. Your attorney from New York. Is there a reason you can't stay somewhere else for the next 10 days? If I leave the estate, it signals that I'm rattled. Derek's people are watching. We both know that. She looked out at the driveway. If I go to a hotel, it looks like retreat. The board reads optics whether they admit it or not. Okay, he said. Then I want to install proper security cameras, real ones, external coverage, cloud storage somewhere they can't access. And I want you to have someone here overnight. Logan, not me, he said, anticipating her objection. I know a guy. Former law enforcement, does private security work. Discreet, professional. He can be here as maintenance staff if you want cover for it. She was quiet for a moment. The look she was giving him wasn't quite resistance anymore. It was closer to the look she got when she'd already thought through an argument and found she didn't have a strong counter. His name? She said. Ray Cortez. I've known him 8 years. He's solid. Another pause. Set it up. Ray arrived the following morning in a plain white truck with no signage, dressed like he was there to work on something, which was the arrangement. I was in his late 40s, quiet in the way that came from having once been required to be quiet professionally, and he and Logan did a full walk of the property that took most of the morning. They identified camera placement, blind spots, the 3 most likely entry points for someone who knew the property well, and one section of the east wall where the stone had eroded enough at the base to allow access without going near the gate. Ava walked the perimeter with them for the first hour. She asked Ray specific questions about detection timing and response capability, and he answered them without condescension, which Logan had specifically warned him about in advance. She'd been talked down to by enough men in enough rooms that she had a reflex for it, a slight tightening around the eyes that Logan had learned to read. Ray passed without incident. By the end of the day, there were 6 cameras installed, their footage routed to a cloud account that only Logan and Ava had credentials for, and Ray was set up in the small apartment above the garage that Ava said had been used by the estate's previous caretaker. The whole operation had the quality of a careful, quiet fortification, building walls around something that was already under siege. That evening, after Ray had settled in and the crew had gone home, Ava sat at the kitchen island with a glass of wine. She wasn't really drinking, and her laptop open to documents she wasn't really reading. Logan was finishing up a report on the completed drainage work, documentation they'd need for Patricia's filing, at the other end of the island. The kitchen was warm. Outside it had dropped into the low 30s. My mother called today, Ava said, not particularly directed at him, just said, the way you say something when it's sitting in you and needs somewhere to go. What'd she say? She saw something online, about me. She turned the wine glass slowly. There's a piece on a financial news site. Anonymous sources saying I'm planning to sell my controlling stake, that I've already been in talks with outside buyers. Logan looked up from his laptop. That's not true. Of course it's not true. She said it without heat. But it doesn't have to be true to do damage. It just has to get to the right 3 board members before I can correct it and make them nervous enough to flip. She paused. Derek has someone at a financial publication. That's the only way this specific piece gets placed this specific week. Can Patricia use that? She's already on it. The byline is a freelancer with a pattern of placing pieces connected to companies Derek has done business with. Ava finally took a sip of the wine. It's smart, actually. In a way, I almost have to. No, never mind. No, say it. She looked at him sideways. In a way, I almost have to respect the architecture of it. 12 years of watching how I work, learning what I respond to, knowing exactly which moves would put me on the defensive. He built this like a contractor builds something, studied the load-bearing walls. She set the glass down. That's what makes it personal. It's not just money. He's using everything he learned from being close to me. Logan thought about that for a moment, about what it costs to let someone that close, about how the closer you let someone in, the more precision they had when they decided to use it against you. You didn't do anything wrong, he said. She looked at him flatly. I trusted someone I shouldn't have. Trusting people isn't wrong. Him being the wrong person, that's on him. She held his gaze for a moment. He could see her deciding whether to accept that or argue with it, and she looked tired enough that arguing required energy she didn't have left. You're better at this than I am, she said finally. At what? Forgiving people for not being who you needed them to be. He thought about Claire, about the kitchen table and the calm voice explaining she was leaving, about the 18 months of anger and the specific day he'd decided the anger was costing him more than it was giving him, and he'd put it down like a piece of equipment he was done carrying. I had more practice than I wanted, he said. She didn't ask him to explain that, which he appreciated. She just nodded once, like she'd understood the shape of it without needing the details. The following morning brought the thing Logan had been half expecting and fully dreading. He was at the estate by 7:30. Ray was in the garage apartment, camera feeds running on his laptop. Marcus and Dex had arrived and were setting up for the final phase of the drainage project. Everything was normal until Logan checked the camera feed from the east wall. the section with the eroded stone base that he and Ray had flagged, and saw it. Tire tracks in the frost. Close to the wall. Recent. He walked the perimeter himself and found where the stone had been disturbed at the base. Not dramatically, not broken, but shifted. Someone had been at the wall recently. In the night. And on the estate side of the wall, in the leaf litter along the path that led toward the back of the house, he found a small equipment case, half buried under leaves. Empty. Whatever it had held had already been placed somewhere inside. He called Ray first. "I need you to sweep the house again," he said, keeping his voice low. "Every room. Start with any room that's been unoccupied for more than a few days." "On it," Ray said. He found Ava in the study, already working, and closed the door behind him. She looked at his face and straightened in her chair. "Someone was at the east wall last night," he said. "After midnight, by the frost pattern. I found an empty equipment case in the leaves." Ava was very still. "They planted something new." "Probably. Ray's sweeping now." She looked at the room around her, the walls, the shelves, the ceiling, with a sudden, visceral awareness that things you can't see can still be watching you. It was a bad feeling, Logan knew. He could see it move through her. "They know we found the first ones," she said. "Maybe. Or they're upgrading coverage. Either way, they were here in the night, and Ray's cameras didn't catch them coming through the wall because we had the angle wrong." He paused. "I'm fixing that today." "How long have the new devices been running?" "Depends when they place them. Minimum a few hours." She closed her laptop, stood up, walked to the window and stood looking out at the property with her back to him, and he could see the tension in her shoulders ratcheting up, the visible architecture of someone keeping themselves together through deliberate effort. 7 days, she said. "The vote is in 7 days." "I know." She turned around. Her face was composed, but there were stress fractures in it. Not breakdown, nothing like that, but the hairline kind that appeared when a structure had been under sustained load for too long. "They're escalating because they're losing ground. Patricia told me yesterday that 2 of the proxy-shifted investors have been asking questions about Derek's outside business dealings. That's movement." She crossed her arms. "He knows the documentation is close to complete, so he's pushing harder." "Scared people make mistakes," Logan said. It was the same thing he'd told her 3 weeks ago in the kitchen. She'd said it back to him once since then, almost to herself, like a thing she was trying to believe through repetition. "I know," she said. "I just need to make sure I'm not the one who makes one first." Ray found the new device 40 minutes later. It was in the second-floor hallway, inside the light fixture housing directly outside the door to the study, positioned to capture everything going in and out of that room. They documented it the same way they documented the others. Photographs, timestamps, everything. Patricia was notified by secure message within the hour. The afternoon was quiet in the tense way that days go quiet before something breaks. Marcus and Dex worked the drainage, the concrete saw running in irregular bursts. Ray ran the camera feeds on a continuous monitor. Logan moved through the property doing final punch list items on the construction work while keeping half his attention on everything else. It was Dex who found the envelope. He came to Logan at 3 in the afternoon with it, holding it by the corner the same way Logan had taught him to handle anything that showed up unexpectedly on the property. It had been left on the windshield of Logan's truck, which was parked in the estate driveway. Plain white envelope, no marking. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Logan read it once, then read it again. Reed Construction, LLC. Business license filed 2019. Outstanding permit violation. Millhaven County Record, 44471B. Theft of materials reported by client Dawson Commercial, 2021. Full complaint on file. If you want this to stay quiet, walk away from Sinclair. Logan stood in the driveway and read it a third time. The permit violation was real. A technicality from a job he'd done in his first year of business. A zoning overlap that had been resolved through the county office at a cost of $400 and a lot of paperwork, but had never been expunged from the public record because he'd never had a reason to expunge it. The kind of thing that looked worse than it was to someone who didn't know the context. The theft complaint from Dawson Commercial was also real, in the sense that it had been filed. What the complaint did not mention was that it had been investigated, found baseless, and closed without action within 60 days. A subcontractor on that job had helped himself to materials and pointed at Logan to cover it. Logan had provided the documentation, the investigation had agreed, The subcontractor had been charged. The whole thing was on record. But the record also showed the complaint itself, and in the right framing, the wrong framing, it looked like something it wasn't. His hands were steady. His chest was not. He went inside and found Ava and put the sheet of paper on the kitchen island in front of her. She read it. She looked up. "This isn't true," she said. Her voice was flat and certain, not a question. "The violation is a resolved technicality. The theft complaint was investigated and closed. The subcontractor was charged. All of it's documentable." He paused. "But if someone sends this to the right people before we can contextualize it, the board, local media, the county licensing office, it creates noise." "Noise is enough," she said quietly. "If they can make you look compromised, it makes everything you've helped me document look compromised." "I know." She looked at the paper again. Then she said something that surprised him. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't? No." She looked up at him. "This came for you because of me, because you helped me. I'm not going to pretend that doesn't matter." He let that sit for a moment. "It matters," he agreed. "It also doesn't change anything. I'm not walking away." She held his gaze. In the year, no, the 6 weeks, but it had compressed somehow into the weight of longer. Since the storm had put him in her driveway, he had seen her calculating, contained, controlled, occasionally angry with the specific anger of someone who won't let themselves be loud about it. He had seen her with Nora on the porch steps, explaining fractions in the pale afternoon. He had seen her holding a threat note in a plastic bag and talking about a wedding from 12 years ago. He had not seen her look the way she looked right now, which was like someone who had been told they weren't alone and hadn't quite figured out what to do with that. "Why?" she asked, not challenging, actually asking. He thought about it. Thought about the real answer versus the easier one. "Because you didn't back down," he said. "When the threat started, when the devices, when the leak in the financial press. You could have walked away from the company. You didn't. It's my company." "It's your life," he said. "There's a difference. A lot of people protect the thing and let the life go. You're protecting both." He paused. "That's worth standing next to." She looked down at the kitchen island for a moment. Something moved across her face that she didn't try to hide this time, which was new. When she looked back up, her eyes were steadier, but there was something in them that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. "Patricia needs to know about this," she said, sending her the photo right now. They worked through the evening. Patricia's response came at 6:30. She'd already had a contact pull the full Millhaven County record on the permit violation and the Dawson complaint. Both were publicly available. Both told the story correctly with full context. She was preparing a preemptive brief to accompany the board filing, covering Logan's role as a material witness to the surveillance evidence, establishing his credibility fully documented before anyone could move to undermine it. At 8 o'clock, Ava made sandwiches, the kind of meal you made when cooking felt like a waste of time, thick bread from the freezer and whatever was in the refrigerator, assembled efficiently and without interest. She put a plate in front of Logan without asking if he was hungry. He ate it. 5 days, he said. 5 days. She sat across from him. Patricia thinks we have enough for the board. The Fortis documentation, the surveillance evidence, the financial trail to Derek's holding company. She says it's not airtight in a criminal sense, but it doesn't need to be for the board vote. It just needs to be credible enough to make them stop and ask questions. What does Derek do when Patricia files? One of two things. She wrapped both hands around her mug. He backs down, claims it was all a misunderstanding, tries to negotiate a quiet settlement, or he escalates. Which one do you think? She looked at her mug. Derek doesn't back down. In 12 years, I never once saw him accept a losing position gracefully. She looked up. He'll escalate. He'll go hard at everything and everyone in that boardroom. He'll try to frame the surveillance documentation as fabricated. He'll use the press leak to establish that I've been making poor decisions. He'll use the permit thing to argue that my material witness has credibility problems. Then we need to be in that boardroom. I know. She paused. I need you there. He looked at her. At the board meeting? You found the devices. You documented the Fortis access. You identified the work order fraud. She kept her eyes steady on his. You're a witness, but more than that. She stopped, started again. I function better when I'm not alone in the room. He'd been alone in the room a long time himself. He understood what it cost to say that. He understood it in the specific way of someone who'd learned, slowly and without wanting to, that the people you let see that were the ones that mattered. "I'll be there," he said. She nodded once, looked back down at her mug. Outside, the November dark had settled hard and cold over the estate. Ray's lights were on above the garage. The cameras caught nothing but wind moving through the oak trees. The house was quiet. But somewhere outside those walls, in an office, or a car, or a room Logan couldn't picture, Derek Holt was looking at a clock that read 5 days and making a decision about what to do next. Whatever that decision was, Logan thought, they'd find out soon enough. He finished his sandwich. He gathered his papers. He said good night and drove out through the iron gates into the dark road toward town, and behind him the lights of the estate glowed steady against the November black. And Ava Sinclair was still at the kitchen island, working through the night, 5 days from the fight of her life. The morning of the board meeting. Logan woke at 5. He lay in the dark of his apartment for a few minutes, ceiling above him. The particular kind of alert that wasn't really wakefulness, so much as the body deciding sleep was finished with you, whether you were ready or not. He'd slept maybe 4 hours. He'd spent the previous 2 days doing very little that looked like construction work. Most of it had been coordinating with Patricia, reviewing the documentation package she'd assembled, and going over the security footage with Ray to compile a clean timeline of every suspicious entry to the estate property. The drainage project was technically complete. His invoice was sitting in his truck, unsigned, because somehow billing for the job felt strange when everything else was still unresolved. He got up, made coffee, stood at his kitchen window in the dark, and thought about Nora, who was at Karen's again, who had kissed him goodbye yesterday afternoon and told him, entirely unprompted, that he should wear the gray shirt because it made him look like a person who knew what he was doing. 7 years old. He wore the gray shirt. He arrived at the estate at 7. Ava was already dressed and at the kitchen island with a barely touched coffee and the controlled stillness of someone who had burned through her anxiety somewhere in the previous night and come out the other side into a cold, functional calm. She was in a dark blazer and charcoal trousers, and she'd done something with her hair that made her look more assembled than he'd seen her in weeks. She looked, Logan thought, exactly like what she was, a person who had built something worth fighting for and was about to walk into the room where the fight happened. "Patricia's meeting us at the Millhaven Arms at 8, she said. "The board meeting's at 10. Vertex's registered office is in the city, but 2 of our largest investors requested the meeting be held locally, since 3 board members are based here, and the travel costs—" She stopped, caught herself. "Sorry, you don't need the logistics." "No, go ahead." He sat down across from her. "Talking through it helps." She looked at him. "Does it?" "You stop running the loop in your head. Saying it out loud makes it smaller." She considered that. "I've been running a loop for approximately 6 days." "I know." She let out a breath through her nose and looked at the ceiling for a second in a way that was almost a laugh but not quite. Then she picked up her coffee mug and said, "Derek will be there. Obviously. He has every right to be there. He's still co-founder and a board member until a vote says otherwise." She paused. "I haven't spoken to him in 11 weeks. How do you think he plays it this morning?" "Confident. He'll be confident." She set the mug down. "Derek is very good in rooms. He's the kind of person that walks in and the temperature adjusts to him. He's been doing it since we were 22. She said it with a kind of tired, clear-eyed recognition. Not admiration, just accuracy. "He'll minimize the documentation as fabricated or selectively assembled. He'll question the chain of custody on the surveillance evidence. He'll use the financial press piece to suggest I've been acting erratically. And he'll do all of it in the tone of someone who is deeply, personally disappointed." "Disappointed is good theater," Logan said. "He knows that." "So do you." He looked at her directly. "You've been watching him work rooms for 12 years, Ava. You know every move before he makes it." She held his gaze. "Knowing isn't the same as having the votes." "Not yet," he said. "That's what today is for." They drove separately to the Millhaven Arms, a hotel that occupied the renovated ground floor of a 19th century commercial building in the town center. Patricia was already in the reserved conference room when they arrived. Her leather bag open on the table, printed documents arranged in the kind of system that suggested she'd been at it since 6. She looked at Logan once when he came in, the same evaluating look from the porch 3 weeks ago, then returned to her papers. "Derek filed a counterclaim this morning," she said without preamble. went directly to two board members with a letter asserting that the surveillance documentation was assembled with the intent to manufacture a hostile internal narrative ahead of the vote. He's calling it reputational warfare. Ava sat down. What specifically is he challenging? The chain of custody on the device photographs, primarily. He's arguing that without a licensed security professional as the original documenting party, the photographs are inadmissible as board evidence. Patricia looked at Logan. Which is where you become critical. You have a licensed contractor's certification. You documented the first device before Ray Cortez was involved. The timestamp on those photographs predates Ray's arrival on the property by 4 days. He can try to challenge my credibility, Logan said. The permit violation, the Dawson complaint, already addressed. Patricia pulled out a tabbed section of the documentation. Full county record, investigation outcome, subcontractor charges. I had it cross-referenced and formatted last night. Any board member who looks at the complete picture has their questions answered before Derek can finish raising them. She looked at Ava. He cannot get in front of this. We've closed every door he was planning to use. Ava nodded slowly. Her hands were flat on the table and very still. Board composition this morning, she said. Walk me through where we actually stand. Patricia did. There were 9 voting board members. Ava held 4 aligned votes with reasonable certainty. Members who had been with the company from its early years and whose relationships with her predated Derek's influence. 2 were genuinely uncommitted, the kind of institutional investors who voted with the prevailing wind and were waiting to see which direction it blew. 2 had shifted their proxies toward Derek over the previous year. 1, a woman named Sandra Kerr, who sat on 3 other boards and had a reputation for reading rooms accurately and voting with her gut, was the variable. Sandra's the one we need, Ava said. Sandra's the one we always needed, Patricia agreed. She's been watching this situation develop for months. She doesn't like Derek, but she doesn't trust ambiguity either. She needs the evidence presented cleanly and without theatrics. She'll get it, Ava said. Logan had been listening and watching and doing the math in his head, and the math was uncomfortable. Even with the documentation, even with Patricia's filing, even with the chain of custody settled. You couldn't manufacture votes in a room. You could only give people reasons, and then they decided. He thought about saying that and then decided it wasn't useful right now. What time do we need to leave, Shum? He asked instead. 9:30, Patricia said. I want to be set up in the room before Derek arrives. They had 90 minutes. Ava asked for tea and didn't drink it. Patricia worked through her documents, making small annotations in the margins. Logan sat with his copies of the surveillance photographs and the Fortis work orders. He'd been given a witness packet, his role officially designated as a material witness to the discovery of the evidence, and read through everything one more time even though he knew it by heart. At 8:45 his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail. He didn't. The voice on the other end was male, low, speaking quickly, and with the careful flatness of someone trying not to be identifiable. Is this Logan Reed? Who's calling? Someone who has information you need before 10 o'clock this morning. A pause. I work for Fortis Property Services, or I worked for them. I drove the crew that did the kitchen work at the Sinclair estate, the range hood job. Logan's hand tightened on the phone. Across the table, Ava had looked up. He held up one finger, and she went still. I'm listening, he said. I didn't know what I was there to do. I was told it was a standard maintenance call. I was handed a case. I was told to mount it inside the range hood housing and walk out. I didn't ask questions because I needed the money, and because the guy who gave me the job was... He stopped. The point is, I didn't know it was surveillance equipment. When I found out what Fortis was actually doing, I went to Derek Holt's office directly. I told him I wasn't comfortable with it. He paid me 3 months' wages and told me to forget it. Why are you calling me? Because I saw the counterclaim he filed this morning. He's going to stand up in that room and say the evidence was planted. He's going to say you and Sinclair fabricated the whole thing. A pause, shorter this time. I was in that house. I know what I put in that range hood. I know who told me to put it there. And I'm not going to sit quiet while he... He stopped again. I'm not doing that. Logan looked at Patricia. She was already leaning forward, reading his face. He said to the phone, Can you be at the Millhaven Arms in 30 minutes? A pause. Yes. Ask for Patricia Weil at the front desk. He put the phone down. Patricia was already on her feet before he could speak. He told her and Ava in 3 sentences what the call had been, and Patricia made a sound that in a less controlled person would have been something much louder. "Get him here," she said, "right now." His name was Carter Mills, and he was 29 years old, and he arrived at the Millhaven Arms at 9:10, looking like someone who hadn't slept well and had made a decision in the night that he was still deciding whether to commit to. He was average height, work rough hands, the kind of face that was hard to read until he started talking, and then you could see clearly that he was scared and had showed up anyway. Patricia sat him down, got him water, and walked him through everything he knew with the methodical efficiency of someone who had exactly 20 minutes to turn a phone call into a usable statement. Logan sat at the edge of the table and watched Carter describe the Fortis operation. The jobs that were listed as maintenance but were access operations. The cases of equipment he'd transported without being told what was in them. The payment from Derek that was off the books and in cash. Ava sat across from Carter. Her face was very still while he talked. When he finished, she said, "Why today? Why not 6 months ago?" Carter looked at her. He didn't look away, which Logan noted. "Because 6 months ago I told myself it was just business, and I didn't understand what I'd been part of. Then I saw what he's trying to do to you in that room today, and He stopped. "My sister built something, a small thing, a bakery. 2 years ago her business partner did something similar, nothing this big but the same shape of it. She lost the place." He looked down at the table. "I should have come forward earlier, I know that." Patricia had already been typing on her laptop. She turned the screen toward Carter. "I need you to read this statement and sign it. It summarizes everything you just told me. If you sign it, I'm filing it with the board documentation in the next 15 minutes. You understand that Derek Holt will know you provided this." Carter read the statement. His jaw moved slightly. Then he picked up the pen Patricia was holding out and signed it. They arrived at the Vertex board meeting room at 9:52. The space was a conference suite on the second floor of the Millhaven Arms. The same building, different wing, a room with a long table and too many chairs and windows that looked out onto the town's main street. Several board members were already seated when they walked in. Logan scanned the room the way he scanned a job site. Who was where? What was the layout? Where were the load-bearing points? Derek Holt was at the far end of the table, talking to one of the proxy-aligned board members, and he looked up when Ava walked in. He was 50, well-dressed in the way of someone who had made money doing the kind of work that didn't make your hands rough. He had a broad, confident face and the practiced ease of a man who'd been winning rooms for a long time. When his eyes moved to Logan, there was a flicker, assessment, recalibration, something quickly settled back under the surface. He didn't look rattled. Logan had hoped he'd look at least slightly rattled. Ava took her seat at the head of the table without looking at Derek directly. Patricia sat to her right. Logan took the chair along the wall designated for witnesses and counsel, not at the table itself, just outside it, the position of someone present but not voting. Sandra Kerr was third from the left, gray-haired, upright posture, reading something on her tablet with the attention of someone who would not be performing interest she didn't have. She glanced at Ava when she sat down. She glanced at the documentation Patricia was arranging on the table. Then she looked back at her tablet. The meeting opened at 10 o'clock precisely, called to order by the board chair, a man named Robert Fenn, who had the manner of someone who'd agreed to this role because nobody else wanted it and had been regretting it ever since. He moved through the procedural items with the speed of a man who wanted to get to the hard part and get out the other side, and then gave the floor to Patricia for the formal filing. Patricia presented the documentation the way she would have in a court, methodically, without embellishment, letting the evidence carry its own weight. The Fortis work orders, the surveillance device photographs, time-stamped, with Logan's contractor license documentation establishing his credentials as the discovering party. The financial trail from Fortis through 2 shell entities to Derek's holding company. The pattern of anonymous threats cross-referenced against the Fortis access timeline. And then Carter Mills' signed statement. She read key sections aloud without looking up from the page, and Logan watched the room. 2 of Derek's proxy-aligned board members had gone very still. The uncommitted institutional investors were leaning forward. Sandra Kerr had put down her tablet. Derek had been sitting with his hands folded on the table throughout Patricia's presentation, and he looked exactly as Ava had predicted. Composed, mildly disappointed, the posture of someone preparing to be patient with a misunderstanding. When Patricia finished and Robert Fenn turned to him for response, he opened his mouth with the easy authority of someone who had been preparing a different counterattack. Then Robert Fenn said, "Before you respond, Mr. Holt, I'm required to note for the record that we received a supplementary statement at 9:28 this morning from a Carter Mills, identified as a former Fortis Property Services employee. This statement has been distributed to all board members. Mr. Holt, are you familiar with this individual?" The composure took a hit. Not a collapse. Derek was too experienced for a collapse, but a contraction, the way a structure responds when an unexpected load arrives, everything pulling slightly inward, recalculating. "I know the name," Derek said, marginally. "He did some contract work. He states that you paid him in cash to remain silent about his role in placing surveillance equipment at the Sinclair estate," Robert Fenn said. "Is that accurate?" "That's a fabrication. He has bank records showing a cash withdrawal from your personal account consistent with the amount and date he specifies." Patricia said it without inflection, from the table, not looking up. "Those records are in the supplementary exhibit, tab 7. The room had gone very quiet. Derek looked at Ava for the first time. It was not the look Logan had expected. Not defiance, not calculation. It was something flatter and more complicated, like a man looking at the full cost of a decision and finding it higher than he'd budgeted. Ava looked back at him. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. 12 years of reading each other across tables, and this was the last one, and she'd let the evidence do what 12 years of history couldn't. Sandra Kerr spoke for the first time. "I'd like to request a 30-minute recess. I have questions I want to put to Ms. Sinclair privately before we continue." Robert Fenn called the recess. The room shuffled. Derek huddled with his attorney at the far end. Patricia made notes. Logan stood and stretched and looked out the window at the main street below. Ordinary Tuesday morning in Mill Haven, cars and coffee, and people walking to work with no idea what was happening 2 floors above them. Ava appeared at his shoulder. "Kerr wants a private conversation," he said quietly. "I know." She was looking at the window too, at the street below. "I'm not scared of that conversation." "I know you're not." She was quiet for a moment. "The way he looked at me just then," she said. Not Derek's name, but Logan knew who she meant. "I've been dreading that look for 6 weeks, thinking about it. 12 years and it just—" She stopped. "It just looks like someone who got caught." "That's what it is," Logan said. "I know." She exhaled slowly. "It's just smaller than I expected." The private conversation between Ava and Sandra Kerr took 22 minutes. Logan waited in the corridor with Patricia, who used the time productively by corresponding with 2 other parties on her phone, and he used it unproductively by drinking bad hotel coffee and watching the elevator doors. When Ava came back out, Sandra Kerr was behind her. The older woman looked at Patricia briefly and gave a nod that was too small and too specific to mean nothing. They went back into the room. The vote took 11 minutes. The acquisition proposal that had been the original pretext for the meeting passed 7-2, with Derek and his closest proxy as the dissenting votes. The supplementary motion, a formal resolution requiring an independent investigation into the surveillance activities documented in Patricia's filing, passed 8-1. Derek abstained from the second vote. It was the most telling thing he did all morning. Robert Fenn closed the meeting with the particular relief of a man who never wanted to be in the room in the first place and was now definitively leaving it. Board members gathered their materials, spoke in low clusters, moved toward the door. Derek's attorney touched his arm, and the 2 of them moved to the corner, heads together, already in a different conversation entirely. The kind about what comes next when the position you've been holding for 18 months collapses in a single morning. Logan stood by the window and watched Ava accept a handshake from Sandra Kerr that lasted a moment longer than handshakes usually do. Sandra's other hand coming up to clasp Ava's forearm, something private and direct in it that Logan didn't try to hear. Patricia appeared at his side. "State Attorney's Office will be contacted by end of day," she said quietly. "The cash payment to Mills alone is potentially criminal, combined with the surveillance installation and the threats." She paused. "Derek is going to need a much better attorney than the one he's currently talking to." "What happens to the company?" "The company is Ava's," Patricia said. "It was always Ava's. Today just makes it undeniable." Across the room, Derek was moving toward the door. He passed close to Logan. Not intentionally, just the geometry of the room. And for a moment they were 2 feet apart. Derek glanced at him. Logan looked back. There was no point in anything. No confrontation, no satisfaction performed out loud. Logan had spent enough time on jobs where something had been built wrong and needed to be corrected to understand that correcting it wasn't dramatic. You identified the problem. You did the work. The building stood, or it didn't. Derek Holt walked out the door. Ava crossed the room and stopped in front of Logan. She looked at him for a moment with a kind of quiet that was different from all her other quiets. Not the contained processing kind. Not the controlled in front of people kind. Not the exhausted at the kitchen island kind. This was the quiet of someone on the other side of a thing they'd been afraid of. "Hey," he said. "Hey." She pressed her lips together briefly. "I don't really know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." "I know." She looked at her hands for a second, then back up. "You walked into a board meeting as a material witness for a woman you met because a storm stranded you at her house. On a Tuesday." "The invoice is still in my truck," he said, "for the drainage work." She looked at him, and then she laughed. A real one, not brief and escaped like in the kitchen weeks ago, but full, with her head tilting back slightly, and the tiredness in it, and the relief in something that sounded like the first genuinely unguarded thing she'd let out in a long time. Patricia, who was walking past with her leather bag, glanced at them both. She said nothing, but Logan caught the edge of an expression on her face that said she was filing something away. Outside the windows, the town went on. The street below looked the same as it had an hour ago, but in the conference room on the second floor of the Millhaven Arms, the weight that had been sitting on everything for the last 6 weeks had shifted, and the air felt different, and Logan Reed stood next to Ava Sinclair in the aftermath of the hardest morning of her professional life, and thought about all the ways a structure could hold when you built it right. Not perfectly. Never perfectly. But right. The investigation into Derek Holt moved the way these things move when the evidence is clean and the money trail is documented and a signed witness statement exists in a lawyer's filing system. Slowly at first, then all at once. Patricia Weil contacted the state attorney's office the afternoon of the board meeting, as she'd told Logan she would. By the following week, Derek had retained new counsel. By the end of November, he had quietly resigned from the Vertex board. No announcement, no press statement, just a brief letter to Robert Fenn that said he was stepping back to focus on other professional interests. The kind of language that fooled nobody, but gave everyone involved enough cover to avoid a public spectacle while the legal process ran its course. The acquisition Ava had fought for was approved. The two proxy-shifted investors, facing their own potential scrutiny over the nature of their arrangement with Derek, returned their voting alignments to neutral without being asked twice. Fortis Property Services ceased operations the same week. Derek resigned. Carter Mills gave a full statement to investigators and was offered cooperation, consideration in exchange. He called Logan once afterward, brief and awkward, and Logan told him he'd done the right thing and meant it, and the call was short because neither of them were people who needed to make more of a moment than it was. Logan submitted his invoice for the drainage work in early December. Ava paid it within 24 hours, which was faster than any invoice he'd ever sent had been paid in his life, and she added a line in the payment memo that said full scope, exceptional work, and he sat in his truck in the parking lot of the hardware store reading that on his phone and felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't realized was still unsettled. He didn't see her for 3 weeks after the board meeting. That wasn't planned. It wasn't avoidance, wasn't distance chosen for a reason. It was just what happened when the emergency was over and regular life reasserted itself. He had other jobs. She had a company to stabilize after 6 months of internal siege. The daily rhythm of the estate, the work, the kitchen island, the morning coffee on the porch, had been the container for something that was still finding its shape. And without the container, they were both just people with full lives and not quite enough courage to figure out what they were to each other outside the context of a crisis. He thought about calling, several times. He'd pick up his phone and then put it down and tell himself she was busy, she was dealing with the company, she didn't need him underfoot now that the thing was resolved. He was aware this was at least partially cowardice, and that awareness didn't fix it. Nora fixed it, in the way that Nora fixed things, inadvertently, completely, with no understanding of what she was doing. It was a Saturday in mid-December, 3 weeks and 2 days after the board meeting. Logan was making pancakes and Nora was sitting at the kitchen counter doing something on her iPad, and she looked up from it with no particular context and said, Have you talked to Ava? Logan turned from the stove. What made you think about that? I was thinking about mixed fractions, she said, and then I thought about her. Have you talked to her? Not in a while. Nora looked at him with the expression she made when she was working through a problem that adults were making unnecessarily complicated. Why not? She's been busy. Are you busy? Nora. I'm just asking. She went back to her iPad. You should call her. He flipped the pancake. He thought about the invoice paid in 24 hours, about the line in the payment memo, about standing at the window of the Millhaven Arms conference room and Ava laughing the first real laugh he'd heard from her in 6 weeks. I know, he said. So call her, Nora said, like it was the simplest thing. He called her that afternoon while Nora was at Karen's for a cousin's birthday. He stood in his living room by the window and listened to it ring twice, and then Ava answered on the third ring and said, Logan, in the tone of someone who had been expecting the call without knowing they were expecting it. Hey, he said. Hey. A pause. How's Nora? Good. She told me to call you, actually. A short silence. Then, she did? She was thinking about mixed fractions. He heard something on the other end of the line that was almost certainly Ava pressing her hand over her mouth to cover a sound she wasn't ready to make in front of him yet. When she spoke again, her voice was slightly different, warmer, less structured. She's something else, that kid. She is. He sat down on the couch. How are you? Actually. Another pause, this one thoughtful. I'm okay. Actually. She seemed to test the words. The company it's stable. Better than stable, honestly. The acquisition went through 2 weeks ago. The new analytics team starts onboarding in January. I've been sleeping more than 4 hours a night for the first time since September. That's good. It's very good. She paused. I've been going through the estate, the rooms Derek's people accessed. I had Ray do another full sweep and I've been, I don't know, reclaiming it, I guess. Going into the rooms and just being in them until they feel like mine again. Logan thought about what that meant. What it cost to have your own space made into something you didn't feel safe in, and the slow work of taking it back room by room. How's that going? Weird, she said honestly. Slow. The study is still strange. The kitchen is fine. The kitchen is actually... She stopped. The kitchen feels like yours too a little, which is strange to say. He was quiet for a moment. Ava. Yeah. Can I come by? She was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Yes, she said. Come by. He drove out to the estate on a gray December afternoon, and the iron gates were open, same as the first time. The driveway looked the same. The oaks had dropped most of their leaves, and the property had the stripped, honest quality of a landscape in winter. Nothing decorating it, just what it actually was. Ava opened the front door before he knocked, which he suspected meant she'd been watching the camera feed. She looked different than she had in the weeks of the crisis. Less wound, less armored. She'd cut her hair slightly, not dramatically, and she was in clothes that were clearly just what she'd been wearing that day. No performance in them. She looked like someone at home in her own house. That was new. Hi, she said. Hi. She stepped back. He came in. They sat in the kitchen, because of course they did, and she made coffee, and they talked for 2 hours about things that weren't the crisis. About the new analytics acquisition, and what she was hoping it would make possible. About the construction job Logan had just completed in the next county, and the difficult client who'd changed the specs 4 times. About Nora's ongoing campaign to get a dog, and Logan's equally ongoing campaign to delay that conversation until he had a house with a yard. It was, in its texture, completely ordinary. And yet it had the particular weight of something that had been earned. 2 people who had been through something real together, sitting in the aftermath of it, discovering that they actually liked each other when nothing was on fire. At some point, the light outside had gone fully dark, and neither of them had noticed. You should probably go, Ava said, looking at the window. Probably. Neither of them moved. Logan? She looked at her coffee mug, then at him. I don't do this well, whatever this is. She said it with the same blunt honesty she'd used when she'd told him she wasn't good at telling people things. I've been focused on work for so long that I'm genuinely not sure I remember how to make room for something else. I'm not saying that to warn you off. I'm saying it because you've been honest with me, and I'm trying to do the same. I know you're not easy, he said. She looked at him sharply. That's not an insult, he said. Easy is fine when you need easy. You're not easy, and you're worth it, and those two things are true at the same time. He paused. I'm a single dad who works with his hands and falls asleep before 10 o'clock on weeknights. I'm not exactly a simple option either. She held his gaze. The kitchen was warm and quiet, and somewhere outside the December wind was moving through the oaks the same way it had the night of the storm, the night this whole thing started. No, she said, but you're a good one. He reached across the kitchen island and put his hand over hers. Not dramatic, not a gesture designed for anything, just his hand on hers, steady and present. She looked at it. Then she turned her hand over and held his back. That was all. That was enough. Some things don't need more ceremony than that. In the months that followed, things grew the way things grow when they're not forced, unevenly, with setbacks and adjustments, in the real and imperfect way of two people who have histories that don't disappear just because something new is beginning. Ava came to dinner at Karen's house in January and spent 45 minutes talking to Nora about a science fair project on weather patterns, which Nora had chosen entirely on her own, and which Ava engaged with like it was the most interesting thing she'd encountered all week. Karen watched this from the kitchen doorway and caught Logan's eye and said absolutely nothing, which was somehow louder than anything she could have said. Logan met Ava's brother when he flew in from London in February. A dry, sharp man named Will, who looked at Logan with the particular assessment of someone who had watched his sister build something extraordinary and was protective of that in the specific way of someone who'd never been able to protect her from anything. Will asked Logan about his work with the direct bluntness of someone who considered small talk a waste of everyone's time, and Logan answered him straight. And somewhere over the second drink, the assessment shifted into something that wasn't quite approval, but was the direction of it. The Derek Holt investigation reached its formal resolution in March. The charges, 1 count of criminal surveillance, 1 count of conspiracy to commit fraud, 2 counts of witness intimidation, resulted in a plea agreement. Derek would not contest the charges in exchange for a negotiated sentence that included significant fines, mandatory community service, and a permanent bar from serving as an officer or director of any publicly traded company. He would not go to prison, which Logan thought was probably one of those outcomes that frustrated everyone except the lawyers. But Patricia told him that the permanent bar was, in practical terms, the real punishment for a man like Derek. He would never sit at another board table. He would never run another company. He had built his career on access and influence, and both of those were gone, quietly and permanently, through the orderly operation of a legal process that he had never believed would actually catch up with him. Logan heard this from Ava on a Tuesday evening at the estate. In the kitchen, in the same chairs they'd sat in the night, everything was still uncertain. She told him the news with a flatness that wasn't indifference. He knew her well enough now to understand that flat voice was the one she used for things she'd been holding a long time and was finally setting down. How do you feel? He asked. She thought about it for a real moment, not the quick processed answer. Like it's over, she said. Not good, not bad. Just over. She looked at her hands. I think I expected it to feel like more, like the closing of something big deserves to feel big. She paused. But it just feels like Tuesday. That's probably healthier than the alternative, Logan said. She looked at him. Probably. Then, I wasted a lot of energy being angry at myself for trusting him, for not seeing it earlier. Did you stop? Mostly. She turned her coffee mug in her hands. The thing I keep coming back to is, he wasn't always that person. Or I don't think he was. I think he was someone who started wanting something he didn't have, and let that want make decisions he couldn't undo. She was quiet for a moment. That's actually scarier than if he'd just been bad from the start, because it means it's a choice. It's always a choice. Logan thought about that, about all the places in a life where the choice is made, not the big dramatic ones, but the small accumulated ones. The decisions to go slightly wrong for a good reason. The first time you let something slide that you should have stopped. He'd been close to that himself in different ways, in the angry years after Claire left, when resentment could have easily calcified into something he carried permanently. Yeah, he said, it's always a choice. She looked at him. You're thinking about something. My ex-wife. She waited. I was angry for a long time, he said, at her leaving, at the way she left. At what it did to Nora. He paused. I could have stayed in that. I had reasons. Good ones. He looked at his coffee. But Nora was watching me, and I figured out that staying angry was a choice I was making, and it was a choice Nora was going to learn from, so I stopped. Ava was quiet for a moment. Nora doesn't seem like a kid who grew up with an angry father. No, he said. She doesn't. That's not an accident, Ava said. That's you. He didn't have a response to that. He wasn't good at receiving that kind of thing, the direct, accurate kind of recognition that landed somewhere real. He looked out the kitchen window at the March dark and felt it anyway. There are things you only understand in retrospect. The storm that had sent Logan up the Sinclair estate driveway on that October afternoon had not felt, at the time, like anything other than inconvenient weather and a job that needed doing. The overnight stranded at an unfamiliar house had not felt like anything other than uncomfortable. The first time he'd found a surveillance device behind an electrical panel had not felt like the beginning of something. It had felt like a problem to be identified and addressed, because that was what Logan Reed did. He identified problems and addressed them. That was his life's work in every sense. What he hadn't understood, not at first, was that you could spend years being good at the structural things. The foundation, the load-bearing walls, the drainage that kept the rot from setting in, and still be living in a house with rooms you'd closed off. Not dramatically, not with intention, just by habit, just by the accumulation of practical decisions made by a practical man who had learned that the job in front of you was more manageable than the questions you couldn't answer. Ava had been the same. She'd built something brilliant and defended it with everything she had, and somewhere in the building and defending she'd closed off the rooms that weren't about work. Not because she didn't want them, because she'd forgotten or convinced herself that she could manage without them. What the storm had done, in its blunt and indifferent way, was send a contractor up a driveway and put two people with closed-off rooms in the same house overnight, and let time and crisis and a 7-year-old with good instincts about people do the rest. Reed Construction LLC was officially incorporated as a formal business entity in April, not a reincorporation. Logan had always been licensed and operating, but a proper expansion. 2 additional full-time crew members. A second truck. An office location, small, in a converted storefront on Millhaven's commercial strip. He'd been building toward it for 2 years and had kept finding reasons to delay, and one morning in February he'd sat across from his accountant, looked at the numbers, and understood that the reason he kept delaying was fear. The specific fear of investing in himself the same way he invested in everything else. He'd built structural support for other people's foundations, his entire career. He'd been patching his own. He signed the papers in April. Nora made him take a photograph of the storefront, which she declared looked very official. And Logan put the photograph on his phone wallpaper and thought about the $11 in his checking account last October. The grand opening of the new Reed Construction office was a low-key affair by most definitions. A Saturday afternoon in late May. Some folding tables outside with food. Karen had organized because Logan had been going to do sandwiches, and Karen had intervened, a handful of clients and subcontractors and neighbors who'd known Logan for years. Nora had made a paper banner that said Reed Construction, grand opening in markers, the letters getting progressively smaller as she ran out of space, which Logan had hung in the window anyway. Ava arrived at 2 in the afternoon, which was when she'd said she'd arrive, and Logan met her at the door. She had a card, which she handed to him, and when he opened it later there was a short note inside in her handwriting, not elaborate, not long, just a few lines. You build things that hold. That's rarer than it sounds. I'm glad I know that about you. He folded it back up and put it in his wallet, where he was reasonably sure it would stay for a long time. The afternoon went the way good small-town afternoons go. Relaxed and warm, people eating Karen's food and talking about nothing particular, the spring light doing what spring light does when you're glad to be somewhere. Logan moved through it, talking to clients, accepting handshakes that felt genuine rather than obligatory, and kept finding his eyes going to where Ava was. She was talking to Marcus, who was telling her something with his hands that involved a specific construction disaster from 3 years ago that Logan had told him could retire. And she was laughing in the way she'd started laughing over the winter. Less surprised by it, more at home with it. Ray Cortez was there. Cortez. He'd stayed on as the estate's permanent security consultant, a part-time arrangement that Ava had offered, and Ray had accepted with the same quiet, matter-of-fact efficiency that characterized everything he did. He stood by the food table with a cup of coffee and gave Logan the small nod of someone who didn't need to say much to communicate it. Carter Mills was not there. Logan hadn't invited him, and Carter hadn't expected to be invited. But Carter had sent a text the previous week that said, "Heard about the opening. Good luck." And Logan had replied, "Thanks for what you did," and that had been enough for both of them. Some connections don't need to be more than what they are. It was nearly 4 when Ava found him at the edge of the small crowd, holding a plastic cup of lemonade that Karen had thrust at him. "How does it feel?" she asked. He looked at the storefront, the banner, the people who'd shown up, the second truck with its new lettering parked against the curb. "Like I should have done it 2 years ago," he said. "Why didn't you?" "Same reason people don't do most things they should do," he said. "Scared it wouldn't work." She looked at the storefront too. "And now?" "Still scared," he said. "But it's a different kind of scared. The kind where the thing exists whether you're scared or not, so you might as well just get on with it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm expanding Vertex's East Coast operations. I've been looking at a regional headquarters. There's a commercial property 6 miles from here that's been sitting empty for 2 years. He looked at her. 6 miles from here. It needs significant renovation work. She kept her eyes on the storefront. I'd want a contractor I trust to handle the build-out. He looked at her profile, the line of her jaw, the slight curve at the corner of her mouth that was almost but not quite a smile. He thought about the duct tape and the copper flashing, about the kitchen island and the laptop and the surveillance devices and the board meeting and the March evening when she'd said, "But you're a good one," like it was simply true and didn't require anything more than that. "Send me the property specs," he said. She turned and looked at him directly. The almost smile became an actual one, the real kind he'd watched her learn to stop being surprised by. "Already did," she said. "Check your email." From across the crowd, Nora materialized, as she had a habit of doing, at precisely the moment when she was most likely to be witnessed. She arrived at Ava's side and leaned into her in the easy, familiar way she'd adopted sometime over the winter, and Ava's arm went around her shoulders with the same easiness, the same lack of ceremony. "Can we get a dog now?" Nora asked. Logan looked at Ava. Ava looked at Logan. Something passed between them that was approximately, "This is your negotiation. I have no standing here yet, but I would like a dog." "We'll talk about it," Logan said. Nora interpreted this correctly as an eventual yes and gave a small, satisfied nod and went back to whatever she'd been doing. Ava was still smiling. "You're going to get the dog," she said. "I know," he said. The afternoon wound down the way good afternoons do, not with a clear ending but a gradual thinning, people drifting away, food disappearing, the spring light going horizontal and gold. Karen gave Logan a hug that lasted long enough to communicate everything she didn't need to say. Marcus and Dex helped fold the tables. Ray finished his coffee and drove his plain truck back toward the estate. Logan stood outside his office that still felt new to say, and looked at the street. Ava was a few steps away getting her keys from her bag. Nora was in Karen's car waiting for the drive back, her face in the window making some kind of expression Logan couldn't interpret from this distance. "Hey," he said. Ava looked over. "Drive out to the estate tonight?" he said. "For dinner." She looked at him for a moment. "Yeah," she said. "I'll make the pasta. It'll be better than the first time." She thought about that. "Probably not," she said. "I'm a functional cook at best." "I know," he said. "It'll still be better." She held his gaze for a second, that look that used to be guarded and was now just direct, open in the specific way of someone who has decided that the thing they were afraid of showing is actually worth showing. "Okay," she said, and walked to her car. Logan stood on the sidewalk in front of the storefront with the crooked paper banner in the window and watched her go, and thought about what it was that storms actually did when they were bad enough. They didn't just knock things down. They exposed what was underneath, the good foundation and the rotten one, the thing built to last, and the thing held together with 12 months of duct tape and optimism. They showed you what was real. The storm last October had knocked down trees and flooded roads and stranded a contractor at an iron gate. It had also showed 2 people exactly what they were made of, what they were willing to fight for, what they were capable of holding, What happened when the walls came down and what was left standing after? Not perfect things. Not easy things. Things with scars and closed-off rooms and histories that didn't disappear. Things that worked because they were real, because they'd been tested and held, because the people involved had made the choice, not once but repeatedly, on ordinary Tuesdays and extraordinary ones, to keep standing next to each other. There is nothing romantic about surviving something hard, but there is something true about it, something that easy things can't give you. The kind of knowing that only comes from having been through the real thing and come out the other side still standing, still choosing, still willing to make dinner, even when the cook is functional at best, and the table is a kitchen island, and the future is still something you're figuring out as you go. Logan Reed had $11 in his account last October, and a truck with the heat running on fumes, and a daughter who renamed herself, and a life he'd built without a blueprint from the ruins of one that fell apart. Ava Sinclair had a company worth more than most people ever see, and a house with rooms she'd closed off, and an enemy she'd trusted for 12 years, and the specific loneliness of someone who had learned to be capable of everything and comfortable with almost nothing. The storm didn't fix them. They were still imperfect people in an imperfect situation doing their best with what they had, which is all any of us are ever doing in the end. But it brought them together. And what they built after, slowly, imperfectly, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it was worth, that part was theirs. All of it.